Look at the Great Pyramids at Giza. The sheer volume of stone and the precision of the geometry are so difficult to comprehend that even today, people casually assume aliens must have built them. For centuries, the popular historical assumption was that an endless army of brutalized slaves was whipped into dragging these blocks. But archaeological records show a very different reality. The pyramids were built by highly organized, skilled tradesmen who lived in dedicated towns and were paid in steady rations of bread, beer, and fish. So what actually motivated tens of thousands of people to haul multi-ton rocks across the desert? It was deep, absolute devotion. Working on a tomb for the king was considered a direct service to the gods, which secured the worker's own safety in the afterlife. Leveraging that level of unquestioning faith allowed the state to coordinate massive labor projects for decades on end. But tying the entire survival of a state to a single, supposedly divine human being would eventually tear their society apart. The entire civilization started with a geographical lottery ticket. Every year, the Nile River flooded the valley, depositing a thick layer of rich black mud. While populations in other parts of the world fought droughts and starvation, Egyptians were stockpiling grain. A full stomach buys a society the luxury of free time to plan, build, and organize. Around 3000 BC, leader Narmer used force and politics to unify this river valley. To hold this territory together, he claimed a rank beyond a mere king. He declared himself the living manifestation of a god on earth. Religion and the state became exactly the same thing. To the average citizen, the pharaoh guaranteed the sun would rise and the river would flood. Keeping the ruler happy meant keeping the physical universe functioning. But banking your entire political structure on the claim that you control the weather leaves a massive vulnerability. If nature fails, the ruler is to blame. Around 2100 BC, the rivers stopped cooperating. The annual flood shrank, the crops withered in the fields, and mass starvation set in. This drought triggered a catastrophic chain reaction. As the fields dried, the pharaoh's claim to divinity withered with the crops. Starving citizens looked at their earthly god and questioned why he was failing his most basic sacred duty. Trust evaporated. Local administrators realized the central palace had no magical answers, so they stopped sending taxes. They raised their own private armies and carved the unified state into feuding mini-kingdoms. Stronger rulers eventually stitched the empire back together decades later, but the absolute blind faith of the old kingdom was permanently scarred. Reality had proven the god king was fallible. The next major test arrived around 1500 BC. A foreign force known as the Hyksos marched into the Nile Delta. They brought horse-drawn chariots and composite bows. This was advanced military technology that easily outmatched standard Egyptian copper tools. The invaders captured half the country, triggering another theological panic. The Egyptians could not comprehend how an enemy, completely unrecognized by their deities, was openly defeating the forces of a living god. Prayers and rituals couldn't stop bronze arrowheads. To avoid total erasure, Egyptian leaders dropped the divine ego, stole the blueprints for the enemy's chariots, and forged their own advanced armor. They survived this era because they temporarily prioritized hard engineering and battlefield pragmatism over their own sacred mythology. This survival lesson kicked off the New Kingdom. Having almost lost their entire civilization, the later pharaohs became obsessed with aggressively marketing their divine authority to keep the fractured society intact. Pharaoh Akhenaten ran a radical experiment. He tried to force unity by outlawing the entire pantheon of Egyptian gods, demanding the empire worship only one deity, himself. The public despised him for it. The moment he died, his successors smashed his statues, tore down his temples, and literally chiseled his name out of the historical record. Later, Ramesses II fought a bloody, inconclusive border war against the Hittites, but he returned home and commissioned towering stone monuments declaring a flawless, godlike solo victory. The physical carvings projected invincibility, but the royal ledgers told a different story. Endless military campaigns drained the treasury, corrupt bureaucrats skimmed the taxes, and the state became so poor they could no longer afford to pay their own soldiers. The state was operating as a hollow shell. It maintained a terrifying divine exterior while slowly rotting from economic exhaustion on the inside. Fast forward to 50 BC, and the empire had shrunk down to its final ruler. Forget the cinematic gold jewelry and exotic gowns. The real Cleopatra was a highly educated survivor. She was a sharp, calculating politician, playing a complex game of shifting alliances, desperately trying to keep her country from being swallowed whole by the expanding Roman Republic. By her reign, the ancient concept of the god-king was entirely dead. It was merely a theatrical mask worn by her Greek-descended ruling family to keep the local Egyptian priests compliant and the taxes flowing. When her final naval fleet was crushed by Rome, she took her own life rather than be paraded through the streets as a captive. The 3,000-year-old seat of the sun god was instantly downgraded to a minor administrative post for Roman bureaucrats. The grand pyramids and colossal statues remained stubbornly anchored in the sand, but the civilization that erected them was gone. When a system decides its leaders are flawless deities, it stops asking questions and ignores its own breaking points. Elevating leaders above reality doesn't guarantee immortality. It just guarantees that when the collapse finally comes, no one will be prepared to stop it.